Alrighty, here today with a Saipan redo. So we do have or sorry, not Saipan redo rather, but Audacious redo. We do have an Audacious commentary up on the channel, however. I was posted during a period when I was sorting out some audio issues due to a damaged microphone, so let's hook up another replay and see what we can be up to. So we're up against a Midway, and they have Kreml, Georgia, North Carolina, Amagi, Des Moines, Donskoy, and Zhao. A couple DDs. So, nothing too scary. Des Moines might cause us some trouble. I'm going to start the match by launching rockets, as usual. I'm a tier 10 carrier. I don't have any strong incentive to launch anything but the rockets at the beginning of the match. So I'm going to look for their DDs. So, the Audacious. What is special? Well, first of all, the rockets are absolutely absurd on this carrier, and they're one of the strongest squadrons. So it's a squadron of 9 with attack flights of 3, has the standard consumables of speed boost and fighter, and they have the British rocket. So the British Audacious rocket has an alpha of 2350, and there's 14 rockets per payload and 3 planes in an attack flight. So that means each attack flight launches 3 by 14 rockets, which, if you do some quick math, is 42 rockets per attack flight, which, as you imagine, is a bit absurd. Now, they only have 27 millimeters of penetration, so versus cruiser plating and battleships, you can basically only hit destroyers. But versus destroyers, you can basically only hit superstructure. Sorry, remind me. And the reticle is quite large, but as you can see, because you launch so many rockets, it's easy to just chunk destroyers for absolutely 0 effort for a metric crap ton of damage. So there's Zhao in North Carolina here, and I'm feeling a bit lazy, so I'm going to demonstrate. The fire chance at 9% per rocket is also pretty good considering they're launching 42 rockets with 9% fire chance, so that's essentially firing 42 shells with 9% fire chance, so as you might imagine, pretty stupid. I'm going to demonstrate here, only rockets that hit the superstructure will deal damage, so aim just ahead of the superstructure, and then let the rockets ram into the superstructure there. 7 hits and 11 shatters. But in spite of the 11 shatters, we still hit the North Carolina for something like 6.5k, so as you can see there, rockets are pretty stupid. Now, we have a Zhao and a Amagi there. There's basically no AA on this flank, so I'm going to continue to harass it. Now there is a Donskoy, who apparently already used his radar, but the problem with his positioning now is that he's well ahead of the rest of his team, and his AA, while decent, is nowhere nearly strong enough to stop me, so I am going to go after him. The Donskoy is a very fast cruiser. He looks to be basically straight lining, so I'm going to lead well ahead of him. The Audacious torpedoes are very slow. Oh, that was sitting still. And there we were rewarded with 1 torpedo hit and 1 flood. Okay, I don't really understand the decision by the Sao to sit still when there's a carrier in the match. Maybe he's AFK, maybe he's stupid, maybe both. Now the Audacious is a British carrier. We'll go back to the torpedoes briefly because I just kind of went back to another squadron. And so that just means she has very tanky planes. All of her planes are the Western Wyvern. It's a very tanky plane with good speed. Not Japanese in terms of speed, but it's sufficient to get the job done. They are exceptionally tanky. They have a very high hit point pool. 9 planes for 25,000 health is extremely high. But more importantly, because they're British, they're very maneuverable. You can do a lot of turning even after the reticle is armed, unlike with the Japanese or even American planes, which kind of stiffen up once the reticle gets completely armed. Here I'm going with the carpet bombers. So the Audacious level bomber, carpet bomber, is much more pleasant than the Implacables. It's essentially the same in terms of performance, except it has 41 millimeters of armor penetration, and this means it penetrates battleship plate, which means outside of hitting turrets and outside of special heavily armored ships, such as say the Stalingrad or like the Kremlin in this game, for example, you essentially damage whatever you touch. It's just that it still has the same widespread. but it should be more than sufficient to finish up the North Carolina here, as you saw. Now, going back to the torpedo bombers, so I should probably have gone after that Benson, but it's fine. This is the British torpedo that you're very well acquainted with if you've played with Furies and Implacable. It's a squadron of 9 with attack flights of 3, it has the same British torpedo, 40 knots of speed, very slow, with a torpedo alpha of 6,000, which is pretty reasonable. The flood chance is very high, the highest amongst any torpedo bomber, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very British trait. The detectability of the plane overall is very high, another British trait. But what's important is the handling. You can see here the turns are nice and tight, the plane is extremely responsive, and I can do that even after arming the attack. And I can also do that from a very, very close range. I think the Yamato, in spite of that, might be too close. Yeah, he was too close. So I'm going to come around. I'm going to fly right over the Imagi machine guns, don't really care. You can see here the exceptional plane health on the torpedo bomber squadron. And to get nice and focused, you see this reticle is very reminiscent of the Kaga. If you recall with the kind of converging torps. Alright, these planes are way too low to continue attacking. So I'm going to recall them. And go for the rockets. So I got a flood on that Yamato. He appears to have damage control. He was on fire as well, so it doesn't surprise me. So first we're going to make a pass on the Yamato with the rockets. As I mentioned earlier, they have 27mm of penetration, which means that they can't penetrate any of his plating. He's a high tier battleship. He has 32mm of external plating. Looks like he's gonna die, but I should finalize anyway. Oh, actually, never mind. The Benson's here. So he's on fire, so he's dead. We know this because he expended his damage control. So the reticle got pretty wide there, right as I went on him because I kind of moved, but the reticle never gets narrow. With 42 rockets in the reticle, it's just a very large reticle in general. Ooh. The arming time is still pretty normal, so do be careful of that. This pass, though, I'm not going to miss again. So I'm going to use a mini-map to aim. Coming in from the side. Plenty of time to arm. Just holding down on the air brake. And you see that I kind of wiggled and the reticle got really large, but I still managed to come in and hit him with 5 rockets, and that's just due to the sheer size of the reticle. I'm going to reverse my hull here. We're in trouble here, because I'm spotted by something. Nope, spotted by aircraft, which are harassing my North Carolina. Well, that's not very nice. However, there's a low HP Georgia that I'm going to go for first. You can see here that there's a Shimakaze. I'll come back from with rockets when my rockets return. Benson I can't particularly stop. Georgia either turns or beaches. Either one is fine. You can see here there's a bit of a gap, so we should have more than enough space. Slam him with some torpedoes. He's at speed, so I'm going to aim right in front of him. He's with Kreml, which is a fairly powerful AA ship, but I have a lot of health on these planes, so I'm not overly concerned. Pop the heel in order to tank. And you can see here, even after arming the attack, I can still swing the planes left and right, as I wish. He's kind of slow, so I'm not going to lead that much. The Georgia is normally quite difficult to lead as a 40-knot battleship after all. But I'm going to force him to basically come out and play. He should die to my teammates there. The Shimakaze I mentioned that we were going to consider going after appears to have dispatched himself in some way, so no need to worry about that. Oh, he popped his heel. Alright, so we're going to continue to use the rockets. My teammates killed the Benson that we damaged over there. Just going to make sure this kill happens. Georgia has a reasonable AA. It's an Iowa hull after all, but he's a bit earlier. He's an earlier design, a bit of a prototype. I'm spraying the rockets into his superstructure. So, Kreml. Kreml, or Kremlin, as she's known now, is pretty heavily armored. Oh, actually, we're gonna divert. There's a Zhao here. And the Zhao is covered in 25mm plate, which means outside of that middle deck, I can penetrate him all over. But as I was saying, the Kreml's covered in 50mm plates, so these HE level bombers, which are normally so effective versus battleships because you can set them afire in multiple locations and then also just penetrate them all over the large size, are not overly effective. Nevertheless, between him and the Zhao, there's also a fighter over there. Kind of makes it much easier for me to go after the Zhao. The Zhao here is going to have the problem that even if I don't hit him, because I'm not that able to hit him to use pop defensive fire, I'm going to spot him for my teammates. So just make sure you lead. There's quite a bit of lag time on the level bombers you can see. And you can see that the reticle gets quite large, so it's not ideal for striking targets of that size. Same goes for the Des Moines. The Des Moines covered in 27mm plating. I have 41mm of penetration. Just lead so that he hopefully falls into the reticle as the bombs drop. It takes several seconds. You can see there they actually do a fair amount of damage per bomb. Bomb alpha of 6,000 means 2,000 per bomb strike, since you're not going to be doing citadel damage. Given the positioning, I'm going to launch the torpedo bombers. Very plain Jane game. I'm getting shot at, I think. Can't tell. Looks like those are for me. It's very rude. No, the Zhao is here. Alright. Oh, here we have the torpedoes. He has nowhere to go, so this should be a very, very easy strike. He's gonna beach, so I'm gonna aim right there. So the British torpedoes, short arming distance, short arming time, nice and precise. He's gonna flood. No, he's not. Alright, so we get the follow-up strike here. I don't know where you're gonna go, dude. Just in case my teammates don't kill you, have those. Alright. Do I want to recall these? I am kind of low on torpedo bombers. I'll just recall them. So as you saw there, even after arming, I had quite a lot of wiggle room. And that's the good handling on the British planes. Now, level bombers, you want to arm them like 6 to 5 kilometers out. That doesn't give you too much time to react in case something does happen, but you want to arm them early because once the reticle is green, your planes get a 30% damage reduction, and as you can see, you can still wiggle a significant amount, which means you can adjust your course after without too much trouble. You can see there, the Kreml's shattering most of my bombs with his heavy plating. Come around, get nice and precise. So against Russian or Soviet battleships, whatever you prefer to call them, you want to just go for superstructure damage. But it is an element of RNG. You saw there, 5 bombs, 6,000 damage. Not awful, not great. I'm gonna reverse my hull here, and I'm gonna launch my torpedo bombers because that's the most effective weapon against the enemy carrier. So, since we have time, let's talk about the carrier hull. The carrier hull has about the same health as any other high tier BB or high tier CV. That North Carolina is dead. I'm gonna protect my Shimakaze at 66,000. Its deck is armored, similar to all the other tier 10 carriers, and similar to all the British carriers, but it has the British type of armoring. And what this means is that the middle of the flight deck has a very thick armored deck of 108mm, so there's a 108mm armored strip, but the extremities of the carrier are only 25mm. And this is different from the other two tier 10s, the Midway and the Hakuryu, which I can show you later in port, which have a uniform strength deck all across their flight deck. So the Midway has a uniform 85mm flight deck which can bounce AP and shatters HE essentially all over the upper surface of the ship. And the Hakuryu has a uniform 97mm strength deck, which does the same. In the Audacious's case, she just has the 25mm extremities, so her bow and stern and kind of the sides in and around her ship are either 25 or 38mm of armor, depending on the location, which means you can kind of punch her in the face and in the butt, which you can't, even from range, which you can't do with the other two carriers. I'm gonna try and heel tank through this as I attack the carrier. Gave him a nice lead, so she landed 3 torpedoes there, nice. Gonna go for the rockets for some precision attacks. So she's a bit less durable than the other two carriers in general is what I'm trying to say. The other two carriers can get away with some cheeky stuff in the late game where you push in with your carrier and you kind of use your armored strength deck to bounce shells with relative impunity to damage. Your sides and your belt are somewhat thicker. The sides are 25mm plate as opposed to the other two tier 10s 19mm plate, but it largely doesn't make a difference. It's just can't think of a single weapon that you'll face actually at this tier where 19 versus 25. Oh, actually it makes you more resistant to DD HE fire because 127mm and 130mm guns, so that's American like gearing type guns or like Japanese shimi guns or the Russian 130mm, so that's the Grazi and Kaba HE, can't penetrate the 25mm armor because they only break the I think it's 21mm threshold or 20mm threshold rather. That's why the 21mm strip on the gearing shatters some amount of HE, which makes you extra tough. But anyhow, moving away from the hull discussion, since the game has come to an end, there wasn't too much to talk about at the end of the game there. We did 143,000 damage, 17 torpedo strikes, 41 bomb strikes, 53 rocket strikes. 53 looks pretty impressive, but then remember, as I said, that you launch 42 rockets per attack flight, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. I've gotten games where it's in the hundreds. Never thousands yet, but it's technically possible. 5 defended ribbons, 5 floods, 3 fires, 1 actual kill, 5 incaps, and 3 fighter patrol kills. Team score wise, top of the scoreboard, just by a little bit though. 2100 base experience is alright, but nothing special. Going over to the detailed report, we did some amount of dots, so this does vary. This is a very dot-based carrier in general. She doesn't have a real alpha weapon, as you noticed over the course of the game. The torpedoes are the only alpha weapon, but she lacks the consistent alpha of an HE or AP dive bomber as found on the Midway or Hakuryu. The carpet bombers are too unreliable, so even though they can like splash over a cruiser or a battleship for 15,000, 20,000, maybe even 30,000 damage if you're very lucky, that doesn't really tend to happen that much, and on average they deal between like 8,000 to 12,000 on appropriate targets, which is fine, but still not really an alpha weapon. That's honestly a downgrade over hitting 3 torpedoes, and it's easy to hit 3 torpedoes on the Audacious due to the good handling characteristics of her planes and the converging torpedo pattern. So if we look here, 42,000 bombs, 69,000 torpedoes, and 20,000 rockets, so a good mix of armaments. All 3 of her armaments are very effective for what they do. You just need to be careful with your target selection. As I mentioned, the rockets only have 27mm of penetration, so they only pen BB superstructure once you get to high tiers, because high tier BBs have 32mm of external plate. And then the bombs are a big improvement over the okay, that's not what I want to see. The bombs are a big improvement over the Implacable bombs, as I mentioned. They have 41mm of penetration as opposed to the 32 on the Implac, and so what this means is that you jump from not being able to penetrate battleship plate to being able to penetrate battleship plate. Of course, there are exceptions. For example, the Kreml, as I brought up, and the Stalingrad have 50mm plating in certain sections. So does the Moskva. But in general, 41mm means that if a bomb touches something, it's going to penetrate it. Now, even though you're dropping 18 bombs per pass, you saw with the large size of the reticle, it's actually basically the size of the GK. You do tend to miss a lot of your bombs. So the weapon overall is fine, but could use some work. I'm gonna flicker over to the armor layout so I can just go over the armor thing I was talking about during the end phase of the commentary. So as I mentioned, you have your strength deck. Okay, it's 102mm as opposed to the 108 I quoted, but you get the point. This is basically renders you invulnerable to HE and AP that hits here, especially AP from range. And you have 21mm front deck, so this is DD proof, but otherwise everything else is still going to hit you. It's still DD proof up here, the belt is fine, and then there's some thicker armor of 25mm sections. But outside of the 102mm strength deck, there's 38mm middle deck, so this is resistant to most HE up to 203mm guns, so this is similar to the Montana's 38mm middle deck. The superstructure, of course, is still 13mm, so still get hit there. However, the front and end sections, the fore and aft sections rather, are 25 and 21, which means when you take HE damage here, you will take damage. So this is not bomb resistant proof, and the 38mm isn't bomb resistant proof either. And what I mean by bomb resistant proof is if I go over to the Midway, for example. Where is my Midway? Here we go. So you see this long strip of 87mm armor is uniformly armored, and this basically resists all forms of HE because nothing has 87mm of HE pen. I think the Conqueror 457s might 457 over 6. 457 over 6 brings us to, I think 76mm of penetration, so even the Conqueror, oh no, it's a quarter pen though. So yeah, okay, British battleships will be able to penetrate this, but outside of British battleships, you can't really do it, right? But what I mean by bomb-proof is if you look at the Tiny Tims over here with their 68mm of penetration and the HE dive bombers here with 67mm of penetration, most carriers, most tier 10 carriers are basically immune to Midway damage outside of the superstructure and in the side here if you go with rockets. The Audacious, however, is uniquely vulnerable to the Midway because outside of this 102mm strip in the middle, the bombs and the rockets beat both the fore and aft and also the middle outer section. So you do have to be careful about that, just for verification purposes. I'm going to show you the Haku. It's a uniform 95. So, alright, so my numbers are a bit off in terms of the actual numbers of the armored decks, but in general, these armored decks mean that they're immune. They do have 19mm armor, though, as I mentioned, which means they take HE damage to the sides. 13mm superstructure as usual, conning tower armored. Anyhow, yeah, going back to the Audacious. She's a good ship. Good ship, good ship. All the planes are the same. The Westland Wyvern, good performance overall. A good medium in terms of speed between the Americans and the Japanese, so medium speed. And they have high hit point pools, 2,700 per plane, almost 2,800 per plane on the level bombers. 2,900 here because I have the torpedo bomber module. The torpedoes are what I prefer to specialize on because they're pretty much the best squadron in terms of all-purpose usage, in my opinion. Going for plane health, flight control, so that's why I have really high concealment, and then torpedo bomber health, as I mentioned. Attack aircraft modification, aim time, so rocket aim time, essentially, because of the short arming time, and the short arming time of the torpedo bombers means that I don't need the extra 5 seconds that the torpedo arming I would otherwise take gives you. You tend to kind of arm them closer to your targets than on the Midway or the Hakuryu, so you don't really need the extra aim time. So I find extra attack time is occasionally useful on the rockets. And then the standard 2 aircraft upgrades in the first 2 slots. Captain-wise, I'm using a very standard build. Basically the same as my Midway or Haku captain. Taking the 3-pointers, 3 of the 1-pointers, sorry, and then 3 of the 2-pointers, and then the 2 survivability skills and concealment expert. There is an argument for taking demolition expert instead of, say, concealment. My last point, by the way, would go into improved engine boost. There is an argument for taking or not taking concealment expert and just taking demo expert plus something plain Jane, let's say like priority target to know if people are shooting at you. But I prefer to take concealment. I don't think demolition expert's that important. It's definitely a nice bonus. It gives plus 5% fire chance to bombs and plus 1% rockets. And when you launch 42 rockets, that actually adds up to quite a bit, but I don't find that I need it. In terms of priority, I'd probably start with your choice of your 1-pointers. I prefer air supremacy, but Last Gasp has quite a bit of utility depending on how you want to play, especially if you're pre-dropping squadrons into heavy AA. Last Gasp tends to be come into its own there, but in general, air supremacy first, followed up with torpedo acceleration. As your first 2 pointers to bring your torpedoes from 35 knots to 40 knots, bring them from kind of difficult to use against destroyers and fast cruisers to somewhat usable, and definitely decent against battleships. Helps a lot, in spite of increasing the arming distance. Follow that up with probably aircraft armor for the 10% flat damage reduction, and then survivability expert. And that's your core build, your 9 points. From here you can build as you wish. So you can go back for your 1 pointers for utility, or you can go into squadron speed. So squadron speed effectively both increases your damage and increases your plane health, because planes spend less time in AA auras when they're faster. It also means they return to your carrier faster after making attacks, which obviously gives you more accessibility to planes, and they also reach targets faster, which increases your damage. Adrenaline Rush is taken for similar reasons. It looks kind of worthless, but what usually happens is that the Adrenaline Rush bonus applies to planes which have finished their attacks and have taken damage, and so after taking the damage, they climb up into the sky and become invulnerable, and they come back to your carrier at a faster rate when you have Adrenaline Rush, so that's what it's there for. Concealment Expert is there because we have an absolutely horrendous concealment. Even with Concealment Expert, we're at 12-9. So it's just there so I can operate a little closer and feel a little more comfortable. The planes themselves are extremely detectable. The 10% bonus basically does nothing to them. They go from 10 kilometers to 9 kilometers. Big whoop, they're still spotted from the moon. So yeah, anyhow, there you have it. That was the Audacious. A decent game, just a reminder. And hope you enjoyed. That's that. Cheers.